Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Ecospirituality, deepening your connection to nature. Presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Daniel Behn. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Daniel, take it away.
Thank you, Rob, for that presentation. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I want to thank NetHub for having me, inviting me to participate in this webinar format, this topic that I'm very passionate about besides guiding. And it's a type of guiding that I've been practicing for a couple of years now and is truly something that's really inspiring to me. So I hope you all find it the same. I'd like to start off with a little story to let you all know kind of where this all started for me. It was kind of my first, what I'd say, kind of profound experience in nature. I say I'm a convert because as a kid, I wasn't actually that big into nature. I was more of a bookworm, staying indoors, and my family always went on walks, but I used to kind of hang out more indoors. And then I went through a big transformation, and so I know that it's possible, and so that I know that people connect to nature in different ways because that's what happened to me. Um, so this story starts sitting blindfolded on a beach in Mexico. My family had just moved to Mexico when I was in high school, and we had a family trip to the Pacific coast, and our eco lodge was kind of more inland, so we hadn't seen the beach yet. So we took a walk towards the coast, and once we got close to the ocean, you could start hearing the ocean. The guides that were leading us, the facilitators, they all blindfolded all of us, and we walked single file, holding on to the people in front of us until we were all sitting on the beach. And so I was sitting there, hearing the massive um, impact of the ocean right in front of me without having seen it, which was an impressive experience on its own. And then about 5 minutes later, while 5 minutes later, they said, "All right, you can take off your blindfolds," and I was still sitting there entranced. And I sat there for another 10, 15 minutes easy. And it felt like the waves were kind of like passing through me completely. If you kind of know what I mean, I was entranced. I was completely absorbed. I was part of the moment. That was my first kind of spiritual experience in nature, and that was kind of an awakening for me. And it was a way to that opened up the natural world to me in a different way through my senses. I'd like to propose, because this is a topic which is difficult to talk about, and it's more experiential. So I'd like to propose something which I'm not sure has ever been done on a webinar of NatHab, but I'd like to propose a short guided meditation for those of you that are able to follow this meditation wherever you are. If you're driving, don't close your eyes. But if you're able to, and if you would like to indulge me, actually, let me get past. So wherever you are, if possible, to uncross your arms, uncross your legs, lower your gaze, or even close your eyes for a couple of moments and find your breath. We'll start off simply noticing our breath. And starting to deepen our breath just a little bit. Try and take the air all the way to your stomach and filling your stomach with air with each in-breath. Now concentrate on what sounds are in your environment besides my voice. Maybe you can hear my baby in the background. What's close to you? What sounds a little further away? What's the temperature feel like? Are you able to feel the sun from where you're sitting? Now I'd invite you to travel in your mind northwards from where you are right now. What natural landmark can you find right to the north of where you are right now? How about to the south? What natural reference is there to your south? Think of what's to your west. And the east? This is your natural compass, your natural map. These are the references beyond political boundaries, county boundaries, properties. This is the natural map of where you are right now. Now think upwards towards the sky. Do you know where the sun is at this moment? How about the moon? Where would the moon be from where you are right now? Do you know in what phase the moon is right now? How does this affect you? Thank you for indulging me for this short meditation. This is a picture of me holding that butterfly that I just showed you, releasing that butterfly. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I do for work besides guiding. I have been teaching for a number of years now at a university called the Environmental University of Mexico. One of my favorite exercises there is to invite students to think back on their favorite memory in nature and what it felt like. And it's amazing how many descriptions of that memory are echoes of a spiritual experience. And I like to start with that and remind students, there's usually postgrad students, that this is the reason they become involved in conservation. This is the reason we're all reunited at an environmental university. It's because of this deep-rooted love of nature. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with an awareness or kind of a worry or anxiety about the climate crisis or um, endangered species or the environmental crisis in general, but more it has to do with this sense of love. Um, and this anxiety that a lot of people feel about kind of the direction of the natural world actually is referred to by several authors as eco despair, and it's something that I deal with a lot of my students. And that anxiety many times has a paralyzing effect, and that's why I like to shift the focus towards more of this sense of connection and belonging. Um, I like to say sustainability is a party. Come join the sustainability party. It's a wellness initiative for the planet and for individuals. But this feeling, it's not always automatic. It's something that can be practiced so that you can feel it, and be reminded of it. This moment of warming up a monarch butterfly was one of those moments for me. Um, and just kind of as a fun story, that video, when I posted it on social media, is when I caught my wife's attention, and we started dating after that video came out. Um, so that video has a lots of personal meaning for me too. I'll tell you a little bit more about my story. My parents moved to Mexico as a very early retirement plan. They started or actually assumed the responsibilities of a eco lodge, hot springs eco lodge, very close to where the monarch butterflies overwinter. And it's actually one of the places that NatHab groups stay when visiting the national parks that hold the overwintering monarchs, in Mexico. And I'll talk more about the monarchs a little bit later because they're very connected to this whole experience. So when I moved to Mexico, I was a teenager, and I moved to this. We're in a canyon, a tropical canyon. Um, so I learned all these new plants and birds, and trees in my new backyard. And I like to say, once I was able to give them a name, I was able to recognize them as neighbors. And just around about the same time, I also started frequenting a sweat lodge, here in the area. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, sweat lodges in Mexico are these kind of mud igloo huts in which one goes in to sweat, basically. It is a ceremony, so one sings and prays, and it's all dedicated to our relationship to nature. Um, One sings about the elements, and kind of about the gods seen as animist forces in nature. These ceremonies, they're very popular in Mexico. Um, I know a couple years ago I was in Arizona looking for a sweater lodge. Not as easy to find. Um, Here in Mexico, they're common in hotels, spas, people's backyards, and they're really nice, way of seeing a very traditional, way of seeing of how people relate to land here in Mexico. Um, in a country where pyramids are hidden behind every kind of hill, there are so many, pyramids and so much tradition, linking back to a time when there was more of a respect to nature. And equinoxes and solstices are celebrated almost as national holidays in Mexico. So, there's still a lot of belief, behind this. So, frequenting these sweat lodges, I became very passionate about them. Um, about the same time, I started, learning to guide them myself while I was reading a book called The Last Child in the Woods, which maybe some of you have heard of. It's a book about how kids are affected by a lack of contact with nature. The author describes, what do you call it, the biophilia theory. And biophilia theory is our kind of innate connection or love for nature. Um, he describes it kind of as looking at a sunset, in which we don't really distinguish like out there's the sunset and I'm here looking out at the sunset, but rather we're kind of enveloped by this feeling of being part of that wondrous moment of looking at a sunset. Um, and that's kind of the feeling you get when you visit the monarch butterfly sanctuaries, where they aggregate in Mexico as well. Um, when you're completely surrounded by fluttering specks of orange, and you're immediately kind of uplifted, and it's not just the butterflies that are light, but you become light as well, and you're part of that experience and kind of swaying there amongst the butterflies. I'm sure many of you can relate with similar stories in nature and wildlife. And that is also kind of similar to one of my favorite quotes, which I found at one point and I fell in love with. We sat together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remained. So while I was learning about, my tropical backyard, the butterflies, sweat lodges, this kind of passion for spirituality and nature grew together. And spirituality is one of those terms. It's very ambiguous and hard to define. Um, it's more something that has to be lived, and that's why I want to guide you through a little meditation, but and I'll have some practical tips a little bit later. I want to go through a little bit of the theory because I took it upon myself to try and define what I was living, and I started off with a definition which I liked, and I've stuck with that one for the last couple of years, and defining spirituality as humility and awe. And humility and awe, I think, are two things that we can definitely feel in nature. Around the time I was in college, I took a seminar kind of between the interweavings of science and spirituality. And that kind of put me on to ecology, because ecology is one of the sciences which have brought us a different worldview. Most of the other sciences were focused kind of on studying parts. And ecology focuses on relationships, and this is really a fundamental change on how we see the world. We all learned about symbiotic relationships in middle school, but the ones that we learned are really kind of very overly simplified one-to-one examples. But we're learning more about interdependency and whole webs of interconnection, and we're knowing that interconnection is way more complicated than what we used to know about. Mycelia type of fungi is now, many of you have read or learned about this, about how they're connecting roots of trees to pass nutrients and communication from one to another. And so we're learning more and more about how everything is interconnected, and how do we fit into that model. We all learn kind of this first pyramid kind of food chain model in school, which I think is a little bit misleading. Why? Because it kind of supposes that the apex predators and humans are at the top because they're superior. And I always think, I always wonder, and I ask my students, well, what happens after they hit that summit? It's not like they disappear into the air, but rather it's a cycle, right? Fungi, vultures, they bring back the nutrients and the minerals back into the life cycle. So we know more that it's more of a web or a cycle than a pyramid. And then I like this model where it proposes a third kind of stage, which is seva. Seva in Sanskrit means service. And it's after remembering that we're part of the web of life that we actually take action because we belong and we care. So I like to say or not just me, but it's a quote somewhere that says, we are the part of nature that has gained consciousness. We are the forest defending itself. So we're not separate, but we are part of that interconnected web. There's beautiful Mexican song that says, "I am the weaver and the weaving, the dream and the dreamer," to kind of show how we are an integral part of creation. Later, I took a course by an organization called Pachamama Alliance, on how to be socially responsible, environmentally sustainable, and spiritually whole, and how those three are connected. And the main premise of that course is that Western civilization is based on the illusion of separation, that things are separated, that things exist in isolation. And this organization has an interesting backstory, Pachamama Alliance. It was actually a group of activists who had done some work for cleaning water in Africa. And then they decided they wanted to go help out the people in the Amazon. So they contacted with the Achuar indigenous group in Ecuador. And the Achuar said, okay, we'll accept your help if you accept our help as well. So it was this nice recognition that there needs to be, a dialogue. And one thing that indigenous groups have is they have a cosmovision that displays humility and awe. They see spirit in nature, something to be respected, not only to be understood or much less dominated, but something to be, held, and in as sacred, revered. In South America, they call this entity Pachamama, Mother Earth. So Mother Earth, also known as Gaia, there's a nice hypothesis called the Gaia hypothesis by a guy named James Lovelock. He was a NASA scientist who realized that we needed a new image of Earth that fostered respect. And basically, what this hypothesis says is that the Earth is a living system that self-regulates. And again, this is a change in the way we see things. And this leads to things like Bolivia being the first country in the world to give nature legal rights. And which now a handful of countries like Ecuador, India, New Zealand, and some counties in the US even recognize nature as a legal person with certain rights. Um, Kind of the difference between seeing the world as a living system, um, many times is contradicted with a more mechanicistic point of view, in which we used the traditional science to see a lot of things, kind of cut things up and look at the different parts, and then cut it up again in smaller parts, and then look at that smaller part under a microscope, and then looking at that tiny piece and trying to say that explains all of this. We realize nowadays that that no longer possible. We can't, and with science being so super specialized, hyper specialized, sometimes now we realize we need more of an understanding that combines different ways of studying, of different sciences, and even different ways of knowing, which I'll go into a little bit later. But this way of seeing world as a living system is actually a course that I took in my master program. Course was called Systemic Thinking, and it's seeing things more as a system than as isolated things. And so when we see things as systems, we see much more interconnection. Even ourselves, right? Our bodies are living systems. Something like 95% of the DNA in our own body is not our own DNA. It's DNA of bacteria and fungi and viruses, all living together in a kind of symbiotic relationship so that our body can exist as a system. Um, so these are kind of some interesting ways of thinking that border on spirituality. Um, So about 2 years ago, I was contacted by a group of people in Mexico interested in starting a forest bathing school. Maybe you've heard of this. Uh, started off in Japan, known as Shin-Yoku forest bathing. It's a very simple idea. It's simply to go out into nature and pay attention to your senses, all your senses. And because we forget to listen to our bodies, right? We live in a very rational world where everything has to be explained, and everything goes through this filter. We rarely allow ourselves simply to sense or feel. And this is a big part of my work, is to recognize that there's different ways of knowing, not just our brains. And that led me to study awe. Awe is kind of what makes us interested in things. So that made me realize that, we all connect to things, and in nature in particular, in different ways. So I like to use this model as kind of sources of awe. We're saying there's uh, the rational way of connecting to nature, while some people really like to understand the science and how it relates to their lives. Others like the physical connection, challenges. They like to feel the strain on their bodies when trekking up a mountain or stopping to smell a flower. Um, they want to smell, they want to touch. That's the way that they feel connected. Or even, stretching it out, shaking it out. Sometimes we forget about our bodies as a way of interacting with the world. Um, in Mexico, we say our brain, the chilla la ardilla. La ardilla is the squirrel in our head. It's just constant squirrel. So sometimes we have to silence the squirrel to get to the other ways of interacting with the world. Um, the emotional experience of connecting to nature, I'm sure all expedition leaders for NatHab will be able to tell you that unofficially we're therapists on the trips as well. Um, and that's because emotional reactions to encounters with wildlife are perfectly normal and should be encouraged. Um, I think we have to observe our emotions to be able to deal with them, and be very aware, for example, of gratitude. Um, a friend of mine says gratitude is a um, political weapon, because no one can tell you what to thank. Only you can know what you're grateful for, and these are the things that are most important to you, the things that you care for, the things that you work towards. Um, Other emotions like anger, grief, apathy, they all need to be addressed so that they don't gain control over us. Um, the intuitive access to nature, has to do with silence and contemplation, setting down the camera for a minute to observe and simply be in the moment. It has to do with the way we speak about nature. If we revere nature as a being, one of the essential steps in our forest bathing experience is to ask permission before we walk into a forest. Um, and another big part of our our methodology, our forest bathing experience, what we teach students that want to offer these experiences, is to create an offering. After having an experience in nature, is to give something back. Um, and giving something back, we can talk about getting involved in conservation efforts, um, reforestation, really tangible things that will help out nature. But I truly believe there's something important, that we share a little bit of our essence. And what do I mean with that? I mean to offer, a prayer, some words, some written words, a drawing, as a tribute to nature. And this is ritualistic, it's symbolic, but it's very tangible in its benefits. Um, for us to raise nature up to the level of sacred, we have to show devotion. Um, And to show devotion, nowadays it's kind of co-opted by the religions, but we can show devotion in different ways. In Spanish, there's a pretty word which is florido, which comes from flowers, flores, and it basically means to make our actions and words beautiful. And so this we do for ourselves, we do it for those around us, and for those that we decide to honor, for example, nature. Um, so a little bit of devotion through our arts, our self-expression, our ways of relating to the world. And there's a bunch of benefits for devotion, um, strengthening relationships, emotional fulfillment, increased resilience, community building, um, personal growth, encourages self-discovery and personal development by aligning actions with values and beliefs. Devotion can drive individuals to pursue goals with passion and commitment, leading to greater achievements. And devotion can inspire and motivate others, creating a ripple effect of positivity and encouragement. So a big part of this expression and these actions in nature is, and what I call eco-spirituality is ritualizing our practice. And a ritual is anything that's repeated with regularity and variations of intensity, um, used as reminders to set an intention of a value or of a lifestyle that you want to remember. Um, and it can be as simple as ringing a bell to remind yourself to come back to the present, or maybe to keep yourself accountable in one way or another. Um, what are the other elements of a ritual? One has to be very intentional about the space one chooses and the time to make this practice happen. Um, rituals are traditionally set in place to confront new beginnings, to reflect on a past period, to decide what to let go of, to celebrate, or what's ready to emerge in you. So this is a little bit of kind of the theory behind eco-spirituality. I'd like to get some practical tips on how to apply this to your lives. Um, and I'd like to start off with a little writing exercise, which I'll give you a prompt for. If you have something to write with, uh, pen, pencil, paper, or computer or phone, if you'd like to join me in this little exercise, I'll give a couple of minutes for this exercise. And then if anybody wants to share what they wrote, you can submit it through the questions. And Rob will help me read those out if and when some of you want to share. So for the writing exercise, we're going to do a little moment again of mindfulness. Take a couple of deep breaths. Allow your gaze to drop, your eyes to fade or close. Now breathe in and out through your nose, in and out through the nose. I'd like to invoke the element of the earth. Feel where your body rests, with the chair, the ground, whatever is holding you up. Breathe in and out through your nose. Travel down and meet the contact with the earth and all that holds you up. You have physical roots and emotional roots. Breathe in and feel the weight of the earth. Breathe out and grasp onto these pillars. Now we breathe in through our nose and breathe out through the mouth. Out through the mouth. And we invoke the image of a waterfall. As we breathe, we feel the water gushing over us. In and through us. We breathe and we feel the cleansing, the flowing, the unloosening. Now we breathe in through our mouth and out through the nose. In through the mouth and out through the nose. And we feel the fire within us. We remember what burns within us, sometimes leading us, sometimes emerging unwanted, bursting in anger. We can see it as the wings of a fluttering butterfly, shedding light on what is ready to emerge from within us. We see it as a flame, burning what no longer serves us. Now breathe in and out through the mouth. Air passing through. Winds that carries the music we listen to, the sound of the birds. We feel the porosity of our skin and all that we let in and all that we let out. So when you're ready and if you have something to write with, I invite you to write down these 4 phrases. Write down, I am as a tree because, I am as a tree because, and then I am as the water because, I am as fire because, and I am as the wind because. Tree, water, fire, and wind. Take a couple moments and see what comes to mind. And if you feel so inclined to share with the group, that would be great. I'll give a couple of moments for you to do this, for those of you who want to join. Kind of the point of this exercise is to think of characteristics of the elements around us in the natural world and how those characteristics we can feel in our own selves. And creating those parallels between what we feel inside and what's happening in the world around us. And that interactive kind of dimension is what creates kind of beautiful art when we observe and describe what happens both without and within and creating those parallels. So because we are kind of running low on time, I'm gonna continue.
We do have a couple of answers if you would wish to hear them, Daniel.
Yeah, sure. That would be great, Rob.
Excellent. I am as the fire because I am full of passion.
Mm.
I am as the water because I am flexible. I am as a tree because my limbs are strong.
Mm.
I am as the wind because I'm open to travel in any direction. And those are the ones that we had shared with us, Daniel.
Great. Thank you. Um, I invite you all to expand on this list, and it's always fun to do this in a group because it's always nice to be inspired by these kind of universal themes, symbols, and parallels. So my invitation to y'all interested in this topic is to create your own practice or ritual to kind of um, remind ourselves of this feeling that we wish to seek or come back to. Um, and for you to create your own practice, ritual is always important to, set aside a time, a designated time just to do this, a designated space. Those are the two very basic things that we need, but without, we wouldn't be able to do it, right? Um, so giving yourself a slot of time for this, to go outside, to sit a nice spot that you enjoy. And, you can start off your practice maybe with a little sound like a chime or a bell to really kind of set the intention of, okay, I'm here for this moment, for this slot of time. I'm not going to be distracted by other things. And then, meditation. There's lots of ways of meditating. There's guided meditations on YouTube. There's mantras you can check out. There's yoga practices that you can check out. But it can be as simple as simply paying attention to your senses when you're outside. And what you hear, what you smell, what you feel, both inside and out, what you feel on both dimensions. And then I highly recommend writing these things down. Um, so having a notebook to record everything and trying to describe with the most detail. Adjectives is kind of what gets into the texture of the experience. Um, so description, observation of what's happening around you, leaving some space for reflection. What are you thankful for? What kind of emotions are you dealing with right now? A little bit of journaling, a little bit of reflection, um, observing those parallels between what's happening around you and what's happening in your inner life, um, and be on the lookout. If questions arise, I like to tell my students, ask nature. Um, be on the lookout for signals. This sometimes we can interpret things like a leaf falling as that means this or that, and it's always surprising the answers that we get when we're really open to listening. So that's something nice to try out on a walk. Um, and after observing and reflecting, I always recommend, offering a moment of kind of expression, um, creating something through the inspiration of where you are. It can be a drawing, little haiku, which is a very short poem that you could create to just try and define the essence of the moment through the experience. A little dance. Anything. I recommend trying things that you're not comfortable with. Trying new things. And one of my favorites is nature journaling, which involves a little bit of sketching, a little bit of description. And I know a lot of people are always kind of daunted at the idea of drawing, especially if you're not used to it. I started drawing during the pandemic, just drawing the birds that are close to where I am, become more familiar with them, and really not getting frustrated with the inner critic. We have to realize there is an inner critic, but there is an amazing amount of nature journals that are very inspiring, and practice makes perfection. And even just adding a little title, a little tag, a little description to the drawing already makes it look so much better. Um, so the nature journal really helps to kind of observe what's around us And you can add things that, whatever, you can make it totally personal. Add poems, add a little reflection, add a measurement. There's a whole bunch of examples online that you can check out. I really recommend checking them out on Instagram. There's some really amazing nature journals out there by people doing really creative stuff. And yeah, making a practice out of it. So ritualizing is making a practice. So whatever, these are different tips, practices that you can try out. My recommendation is sticking to one or two, and being open to modifying them. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be exactly one way or another, but trying out different things and seeing what works for you. Um, I have this quote on the moon because these rituals are kind of reminders of us. We get distracted by a lot of things, but then we come back. We get distracted and then we come back, and that's kind of the reminder of what the moon is there. The moon can be a reminder of that cyclicity of it's gone and then it's there again. It comes into full bloom, and then it has that cycle of always coming back and then disappearing, coming back and disappearing. So the moon can be kind of a symbol of us, of our paths, of feeling our spiritual path. Kind of to end with my presentation, these are some of the resources, some of my favorite books on the subject. Grab a screenshot, or if perhaps you're interested in it. Last Child in the Woods I talked about. Becoming Animal is a really amazing book. That last book, Active Hope, really beautiful book about hope, about eco despair and how we keep hope um, with everything happening in the natural world and in the world in general. And then I have a reference to a podcast which is called The Emerald, kind of about the animist world and myths related to the animist world. I recommend some YouTube videos, guided meditations. These are two great ones, Satish Kumar or Thich Nhat Hanh. And then I have my own website if you where I share some of my reflections and a little bit of poetry that I write. So that's my presentation. Thank you. I don't know if we have any questions, or Rob, you want to take it from there?
Sounds good, Daniel. Thank you so much. Now, if you do have any questions or comments you'd like to share with us, please feel free to submit them via the question field in your control panel. If you go to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 3 lines. You go ahead and click on that, and it'll drop down a menu. Go ahead and hit questions and put them in there. We had another response to the I am as a question. So I'll read this from Elizabeth. I am as a tree because I grow daily. I am as water because I flow. I am as fire because my soul burns freely. And I am as the wind because I change with what circumstances require. And another guest, Deborah, comments and asks the rhetorical question, of course, by human actions, we pollute the wind, water, the tree, and the air. When will we change? I think that's a good question. One that we don't have an answer to. And lots and lots of thank yous for this interesting and different webinar, Daniel. But we don't have any real questions, so I'm going to throw it back to you for any closing comments that you may have for us today.
I mean, I guess I'd take a stab at answering the rhetorical question. I'd say we might stop polluting when we start singing to the wind and the water and the trees and the soil, because then it'd be contradictory to sing and then pollute, and that might bring up contradictions in us. Become more aware of it. And no, I guess my kind of closing remarks would be to invite you all. to the Monarch butterfly trip with NatHab. It truly is a very spiritual experience, being surrounded by the monarchs. And again, I knew this was going to kind of be a different topic to different other webinars. I appreciate everybody's patience and listening to my hippie ramblings. And hope to see some of you maybe on a trip sometime.
Daniel, thank you so much for taking time to present this unique and wonderful webinar to us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel to see the monarchs with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.